Okay, here we are. We're live. It's section 38 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, food of a non-Jew. In the general context, we are at the final stages of preparing food, and next on the agenda will actually be the process of having a meal, making brachos on food, and kosher and non-kosher food. But for now, food prepared by a non-Jew. So really, when we talk about food prepared by a non-Jew, and you look through the sources of the Talmud, you find that there are actually 8 different rabbinic decrees. We're talking going back a few thousand years, 8 different rabbinic decrees associated with food. So there's vessels, which we learned about over the last 2 days. There's a decree on bread, a prohibition on bread, which we'll speak about, on cooked foods, drinking there, milk, cheese, wine, and meat. So there's quite a lot over here, and we'll work our way through it. Now, in this section 38, we're going to focus on these 6 types of food: bread, other foods, drinking, milk, cheese, and butter. Now, the general reason why the rabbis forbade all of these products of a non-Jew, and soon we'll define exactly what it means that these products are of a non-Jew. Well, there's actually different opinions brought amongst the commentaries of the Talmud. One reason is out of concern that some non-kosher might get mixed in. I shouldn't put them all together. Depending on the type of food, there's different reasons. But the central theme, at least for these first 3 halachas, is actually to avoid intermarriage. So we think we've got a new problem to deal with in the 21st century, assimilation, and how do we combat assimilation. This is an old problem that already existed in the times of the Talmud, in the times of the rabbis long before the Talmud, and they actually set up several things in place so that although we respect our non-Jewish neighbors, we have some level of social distance so that we can respect each other, but at the same time keeping boundaries that need to be in place as far as marriage is concerned. So that is the underlying reason for these different prohibitions. So let's dive right into it. The first thing that we'll discuss is bread. And just to give a little introduction about bread itself, bread is quite interesting because we'll see soon when we learn about the next thing, which is cooked food or any other foods besides for bread. Many foods, if they are processed, cooked, baked, fried by a non-Jew, they become not kosher. But an exception was made to bread. Why was an exception made to bread? So I found 4 different explanations of why bread was different. So we'll see soon that there's greater leniency for bread that is baked by a non-Jew. In other words, although there's a general principle that any food that is cooked or baked or fried by a non-Jew is not kosher, bread is an exception. Why is bread an exception? So these are the 4 reasons that I came across. Number 1, because when they instituted the prohibition against eating bread of a non-Jew, that law that they instituted, that prohibition, wasn't accepted universally, and therefore there were some places that this prohibition never applied to. Just actually to understand this, I'll just give another quick introduction, and that is that any time that the rabbis, we're talking back to the times of Mordechai, the rabbis that instituted the davening, any time that the rabbis, when they instituted a decree, if that decree was not universally accepted, then it would not hold the same weight. Part of the conditions of the rabbis being able to institute a decree would be that it's something that is accepted by the community. So some say that when the rabbi said that bread baked by a non-Jew is not kosher, that wasn't universally accepted. That's one explanation why we're more lenient about bread. A second is, well, if a person is starving for 3 days, they could eat anything, right? Because their life depends upon it. So some commentaries say that actually bread is a food upon which people's lives depend. Interesting. In today's society, many are very much encouraged to stay away from bread. But in the times of, back when the rabbis instituted this, bread was an absolute staple. It wasn't always available from a Jewish baker, and therefore an exception was made because people needed it to live. That's reason number 3. Reason number 4, why we're more lenient about bread, was we see already the Gaonim, which were the rabbis, before even Rashi, Rambam, before the Rishonim, we see that the Gaonim said that when it comes to the honor and pleasure of Shabbos, you would be allowed to use bread of a non-Jew. Either way, for whatever reason it is, and I've just given you 4 just to spice it up a little bit, the bottom line is that one can be more lenient about bread from a non-Jewish baker. Let's see the breakdown. So that's what we're going to discuss in these first 5 halachas. Halacha Aleph, halacha number 1. Asru chachamim le'echol pashel oived k'chachamim. The sages have forbidden us to eat bread baked by a non-Jew.
No, I made a mistake with.
There are localities, however, that are lenient and they buy bread from a non-Jewish baker when there is no baker in the vicinity, or even if there is one, but his bread is inferior to that of the non-Jew. So actually, we see over here 2 different opinions. Some say, so this is a very practical question. The question over here is, can you go to the store and buy a loaf of Albany bread? Is Albany bread kosher? So you'll see that there is a Beis Din stamp on all Albany bread, but you might ask yourself, how is that? There's no Jew in every single Albany bread factory turning on the ovens. So if there's no Jew turning on the ovens, it means that it was baked by a non-Jew. And if it's baked by a non-Jew, it should be not kosher. Because that's what the rabbi said, that food processed by a non-Jew is not kosher. So leniency is granted for the reasons we mentioned before. And what is the leniency? So some authorities say that if there is no bread that was baked by a kosher baker in the vicinity, then you can eat it. Now, according to that, that would be quite interesting. If you're in KwaZulu-Natal or wherever you are, if you're somewhere out there in the middle of, I don't know, in the Kruger, and you want to buy a loaf of bread and there's no kosher bakery, so then Albany bread would be kosher. But if you're in Johannesburg, where there is a kosher bakery available, then according to this, in Johannesburg, Albany bread wouldn't be kosher. But then we have a second opinion, which he mentions as well. Some people say that as long as the bread that was baked by a non-Jew tastes better, then it's fine. So the bottom line is that specifically regarding bread, we find leniency. And since we find leniency, you are allowed to buy bread baked by a non-Jew, provided that obviously you are sure that it was done with kosher ingredients, which is what the Beis Din is certifying, and that's why they're putting the Beis Din stamp. But what you also see from here is that it is certainly better, it is certainly preferable to buy your bread from a kosher bakery, whether it be Shoshana's or Friends or Pick and Pay, wherever it is, a kosher bakery, that's first choice. But if that's less accessible, or even if you prefer Albany bread, then that is kosher as well. As we said, leniency was leniency was granted specifically to breads. But this is specifically.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, if I understand you correctly, if I'm out in the Kruger and there's no Shoshana's bakery, they don't have a branch there, I can buy Albany bread.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If Albany bread's not available and there's a local Spar who bakes fresh bread every day, and I ascertain that all the ingredients that they use in their bread is kosher, I can buy it?
In theory, yes, but in practice, unless you've had some training by the UOS or any kosher agency, there's a good likelihood that even if you think that you've figured out that it's all kosher ingredients, you may be missing it takes several months of training to become an inspector, because there's a lot of things that you wouldn't know to look out for that you need to look out for. So in theory, yes, but in practice, there are certain very simple foods that don't need a hechsher, and bread, you would imagine, is one of them. But that's my answer. In theory, yes. In practice, I wouldn't recommend it. It could be as much as whether I mean, if in that same oven, they're running something else, another product, and that product has a non-kosher ingredient, then that would make your bread non-kosher.
Right, I agree. But if it's purely, if you know what you're looking for and you ascertain that the ingredients are kosher, would you be allowed to consume it?
Yes, specifically bread. Exception is made for bread. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Good. Glad I was able to give that clarity. Okay. Now, this is specifically, Mark, your question was regarding spar, and therefore I said yes. But there's no leniency regarding bread made in a private home. So if you've got a good non-Jewish friend and he actually, you trust him and he says that he's only using kosher ingredients and whatever it is, it's a brand new oven and this and that. So then it's considered not kosher. Why? Because one of the reasons for this prohibition was to avoid intermarriage. And if it's a factory, this is what I didn't mention before, then there's less likelihood of mingling. But once it turns into a person's private home, then there's no leniency granted. So specifically a bakery bread, but homemade bread would have to be made by a Jew in order for it to be kosher.
Okay.
Except in extraordinary circumstances, which I'm not sure, you'd have to ask your LOR, local Orthodox rabbi, about extraordinary circumstances, what qualifies. If you're traveling on the road and kosher bread is available in another town, you must wait and buy kosher bread if the town is within the distance of a parsa, which is approximately 4 kilometers, which it means you generally, it means the time it takes to walk that. 1 kilometer is, I think, 18 minutes, and times that by 4 is 72 minutes. So if you have within an hour and 12 minutes from you a place where you could buy kosher bread, then you wouldn't be allowed to buy bread baked by a non-Jew in a private home because that's not considered extreme circumstances. Now, bread is not considered privately made unless the non-Jew made it for his own family. But if he made it to sell, so that's actually an interesting one, then it's considered baker's bread. It already becomes a commercial product, even though he ordinarily does not bake for the trade. Similarly, a baker who makes bread for his family is considered a private person, even though he's a well-known baker. And his bread is called private bread. So there's an authority who maintains that in a locality where there are no bakeries, it is even permissible to eat the bread of a non-Jew private person. You do not have to wait for kosher Jewish bread. And this is the accepted custom. However, obviously provided there's no non-kosher ingredients. And again, over here, there are different opinions about this. So the bottom line is, to sum it up, first class is to get bread where the oven was actually turned on by a Jew from a kosher bakery. That's first choice. Second best is if it's baked in a company, if it's baked to sell, and you're able to ensure that it was kosher, which would be like Albany bread. So then you can eat that as well. Some people say only if there is no kosher bread available. Others say that even if you like it better. But the point is that it is kosher. However, if it's bread that's made for private use, privately, then it's not kosher unless under pressing circumstances. Okay. I didn't catch that question of there, Brian. You can unmute yourself if you'd like. Otherwise, I'm going to move on.
If a Jewish person who may not have a kosher home gives you a challah, can you eat there?
That's a great question. I mean, as long as you can't be certain that it is a kosher home, then no, because they'll be using utensils that are not kosher. That will be disqualifying the challah. Meaning they'll put the challah in the oven and they're going to put it on a boiling hot tray, and that same tray may have previously been used for non-kosher food. So I'm afraid that you might need to decline. Okay, now what is considered a Jew's participation? So even if a Jew throws in even one piece of wood into the oven when it is being heated, the bread is permitted and is not considered the bread of a non-Jew. So let's say we have a rule in our house that our staff know that they don't ever turn on fires, because that keeps it simple. We're the only ones that turn on the fires. Let's say one day there was a misunderstanding and I came home and I saw there was stuff on the fire. I assumed my wife probably put it on. I open up the pots. I see there's some nice, whatever it is, a nice chicken soup. And I stir it up a little bit, add a little bit of spices, or even not, even if I just stir it up a little bit, and I continue on my way to do whatever I need to do. And then I later discover that this particular fire was never turned on by a Jew, which means that the soup is not kosher. So the truth is the soup would be kosher. Why? Because by me stirring the pots, it means I've had some form of participation. And as long as a Jew participates in any step of the process, then it becomes kosher. So basically, as long as there's Jewish involvement, it's fine. Preferably, the Jew should be turning on the oven, even if he added some wood. I think for Sfardim, they have to actually turn on the oven. Maybe more than that, maybe put it on as well. For Ashkenazim, as long as you have any participation, then that already makes it considered like it was made by a Jew, and it is kosher.
If you bought the ingredients, is that considered as participation?
Again?
If you bought the ingredients, if you were the shopper, no, that's participation.
I mean, if your wife's asking for help on a Friday afternoon then to do some shopping, then that's definitely considered participation if that's what she needs, but not in the context of making food considered kosher. Just to be make things clear. Okay, number 3, Ezekiel bread. Anybody here heard of Ezekiel bread? No. In the States, there's something very popular. I don't know if it's still there now, but it was there when I was studying there. It was called Ezekiel bread. You could buy it in any of the large supermarkets, Trader Joe's, Walmart. And the amazing thing about Ezekiel bread was that it was bread. And without any Jewish involvement in the factory, other than inspections, it was kosher. Even though the bread was baked by a non-Jew. Why is that? So let's see. The sages forbid the bread of a non-Jew only if it is made of the 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, rye, spelt. But bread made from other legumes like bean bread, pea bread, corn bread, etc. is not considered bread and is also not forbidden as food cooked by a non-Jew because it is not fit to be served on the table of kings. We'll learn more about that, please God, tomorrow. So this prohibition, there's a leniency if it's bread that's made out of rice. If it's rice bread, then it would actually not have to be baked by a Jew, as long as you can ensure that all the ingredients and the utensils were kosher. However, if the bread has a topping, if it's been glazed with eggs, then it's already not considered bread. This is sophisticated. If you're going to say, okay, well, the pancakes are kind of bread because it's a bit of flour and water, or if you've got a nice big kokosh cake and you say, well, the dough is just like bread. The moment there's any added toppings to the bread, then it's already considered a more sophisticated food and doesn't fall into the category we've been speaking about, and then no leniency is granted. If it was baked by a non-Jew, it's not kosher. There are wafers, cookies that are baked in metal pans. Since there is reason to suspect that the pan was smeared with a non-kosher fat. So that would be a forbidden in any event, meaning even if there was no issue, even if it was considered bread, there's another issue over here, that if the fat that they're using to smear the bread is not kosher, then certainly the bread would be non-kosher. And finally, number 5, I see we're at 519. Dough made by a Jew, that is baked by a non-Jew, is worse, this is a strange halacha, than bread of a non-Jew, and is forbidden as food cooked by a non-Jew, unless the Jew prepared the oven by throwing in a piece of wood. Care must be taken in this regard when sending something to be baked or roasted in an oven of a non-Jewish baker, that a Jew should throw a piece of wood into the oven, or that a Jew should place the bread or pan into the oven. So not only doesn't shopping qualify, but even if you actually made the dough, then that also doesn't help. There's no leniency at all for that. Only if you actually are involved in the cooking process where it actually reaches the heat. So whether you turn on the fire or you put the bread into the oven, then it would be kosher. But if you've actually made the dough, then actually no leniency is regarded, even though it's bread, because you're involved over here. And I guess perhaps, according to one of the explanations, the concerns of intermarriage would increase. Thanks so much for joining us to learn all about bread of a non-Jew. And please God, tomorrow we'll learn about other foods and what happens if your staff cooked up some pasta or some baby cereal, or she decided to put into the oven some apples and made baked apples. We'll learn all about that. Stay tuned, same time, same place, tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Thanks so much for joining.